مشاهدينا الأعزاء، أهلا بكم في حلقة جديدة من برنامج إسأل المدير، نستضيف من خلالها السيد ماتياس شمالي مدير شؤون الأونروا في غزة. Matthias, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. Good to have this opportunity for an Ask the Director session.
Good. Matthias, let's start with the general overview. Currently, the challenges in Gaza are increasing. What steps is UNRWA taking to make sure that there is a continuity of the services in light of the different challenges the people of Gaza are facing?
Let me first of all share a few thoughts on what I see as the challenges. Number one, I think one has to start talking about being in the 14th year of blockade if talking about the environment in Gaza and its challenges. And I think the main challenge that comes out of that is rising unemployment, rising desperateness of people combined with a lack of hope, a lack of ability to move. So there's a whole set of challenges linked to 14 years of blockade, and underlying that, of course, the occupation. I think a second set of challenges linked to this in some ways is that after 3 wars over the last decade or so, after 2 years of great marches of return, we need to remember more than 35,000 people were injured, more than 200 killed, including 13 children that went to our UNRWA schools. We are dealing with an increasing mental health crisis. I really think that this is ignored too much. We need to speak about the devastating impact these wars, the great marches of return, and everything that's going on have on the well-being of people and their mental health. Now, what your question was, what can UNRWA do to address these challenges and to maintain continuity? So the first thing I would like to say is the core of what we do needs to continue, and we need to do everything possible that we attract the funding to continue our core services. And here I'm thinking in particular of our schools. I think it is important for the well-being of children and to maintain their hopes for the future that they get a good education. So our focus will always remain on let's make sure whatever happens that our education can continue. Secondly, health work. I think we need to do whatever we can to have the funds to continue the fantastic work being done at our 22 health centers. And there are, of course, a number of other activities. Let me mention just one more, which is the relief and social services work and the fantastic support our relief workers and our social workers provide to vulnerable people. That's one bit, so really continuity of our core services. I think a second bit is we need to remain flexible to adapt. And I cannot tell you now in what way we will adapt because it depends on how the circumstances evolve. But let's look back on this last year. I think UNRWA has really proven how it can be flexible and adapt and innovate through the COVID-19 crisis. So the fact that during the second quarter of last year we delivered to the homes of 1.1 million people the food they were eligible for. To shift a large operation like this from people coming to 11 distribution centers to receiving food at home was a phenomenal achievement. Telemedicine, our 22 health centers shifted to providing a lot of their service online or through the telephone. And then let me use a final example, which is education again. I think the fact that our teachers, our education staff were able to accompany children through this period of staying at home through remote learning. So it's the combination of the two. It's the continuity of the core work we are mandated to do, and it is adapting, being flexible, being innovative. And of course, under all of this is to have predictable funding.
Mm-hmm. And do we have like a latest figure where we stand with the funding for UNRWA? Because this is usually the main factor where our services get affected.
Of course, it's early days in the year. We're in month 2. As things stand, based on a conservative estimate of income, this will be a tight year again. And the reason for that is, number one, we've had to carry forward from last year more than $70 million of debt. So these are bills we actually have to pay. Number two, there is of course good news we're expecting out of Washington. We think we will get American funding. We're getting some signals in that respect, but we don't know when and we don't know how much. We're assuming at this point it may not be before the second half of the year, and it will not be as much as before. In the past we got $350 million. So while it will bring some easing of the situation, it will not solve it. Then a third element is that some member states have over the last few years reduced their funding, and I'm thinking, for example, but not only, of some of the Gulf states. And so we will have to work hard on them to bring back funding. So as things stand, our prediction is that if we don't get significantly more than we're expecting, we may end up with a 200 million gap towards the end of the year, and we may have cash flow problems before that. And by that I mean that of course we need the money that's promised to come in good time. So you will remember towards the end of last year we struggled paying salaries on time, and unfortunately we may face challenges like this again. But again, I'm not trying to be alarmist, I'm trying to be realist. And the realistic view is it will be a tight year. If it's not, we will all celebrate. But for the moment, we have to be very prudent and careful around the way we spend the money we have.
Speaking of adaptation to challenges, and speaking of one of the main elements, main service that you've just mentioned, which is education, under the current circumstances of difficult financial situation, of COVID-19, which I'm going to come to this in some questions later. But talking about education, how difficult was the decision that UNRWA management made to bring the children back to school? And what consequences you see in that?
No, it's an important question. We had to weigh off two sets of considerations. One is the safety of the children and of the teaching staff, of course, because we know that it's mostly adults that get affected by the COVID-19 crisis, whereas children, by and large, seem to not struggle as much. So we had to think about how are schools safe enough for both children and adults, meaning in particular the teachers and the parents who take the children to school and so on. Vis-a-vis, the other set of considerations was the future of the children. It is very clear that while remote learning helps bridge periods of not being in school, it is not of the same quality as being in school. So we had to weigh off, the longer we wait opening schools, the more the prospects for the future get reduced for the children. And so in the end, we decided that after many months of schools being closed, it was time to reopen for what we're calling blended learning. So we're still trying to play it safe by not bringing all children back at the same time each day. Blended learning means that basically we've split each class into two. Half the class comes for 3 days while the other half learns at home, and then it reverses on alternate days. So we're trying to address both sets of considerations. We're trying to bring children back for some periods into school, but we're also still very much underlining that it is also about health safety.
And in that regard, what assurances can you give to parents, that they will be sending their children to school? As you rightly mentioned, adults might be more exposed to getting infected by the virus. So we are bringing the children to our schools, but I'm sure that there are set of assurances and precautionary measures that we are taking in schools. Can you tell us something
absolutely.
about that?
So first of all, let me say I was privileged to visit some schools a few days ago, and it was good to see that actually the uptake was very high. I think throughout the Gaza Strip we had more than 90% of children come to schools. The reason I'm mentioning that is that I think parents have understood that we are trying to do everything possible to keep everyone safe. Now, the assurances we can give is, number one, that we will do everything possible to keep physical distances. That's why we've split the classes into two, and that we don't, it was nice to see that on each bench in the class there was one student, not two, sitting next to each other. Of course, we require the children to wear masks. We require the teaching personnel to do that. We're doing everything possible to ensure sure that hygiene measures are in place. I could see on the schools I visited, throughout the school there are public health messages displayed, and I know that from talking to the children and teachers that the teachers are taking care to also make sure the children understand what the risks remain of coming to school and how to address those risks. So it's not rocket science, it is really about the basic measures that we've been taking since COVID started that need to continue. And again, my sense is that children, staff and parents understand that while risks remain, it is reasonably safe now for children to come back to school.
And is UNRWA management prepared in case there is a second outbreak of the virus? What decisions will you make then?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think since we've now had, I think overall a fairly successful period of remote learning only, we know that we can do it, not with the same quality, as I said. I think we need to be honest about this, but we know that if circumstances demand to close schools again, we will be able to do that. So we are ready at relatively short notice to shift from what we call blended learning, so partly in school, partly at home, to totally staying at home, the way we've done it over the last few months.
That's good to know that the preparations are also in place in that regard. Now, Matthias, if you allow me to speak more of a broader issues in relation to the Palestinian community, where lately the Palestinian Authority announced officially that elections are in the pipeline. They are preparing for elections across in West Bank and in Gaza and East Jerusalem. Will there be any role that UNRWA might play in facilitating these elections?
So allow me to first say, Melina, that in my more than 3 years by now in Gaza, it's the first period where I feel a certain sense of, maybe optimism is putting it too strong, but people who were previously very skeptical of any positive political development are now saying, well, maybe we have a chance, maybe actually elections will happen. And certainly UNRWA, as part of the United Nations system, we are very hopeful and optimistic, and we want to support. So UNRWA's role is less one of facilitating elections, that's up to the Palestinian Authority, the Central Election Committee, etc. But we will support. And the main way in which we will support it is we've been asked by the Central Election Commission to provide installations, probably schools, to act as polling booths on the days of elections. And there are ongoing discussions to agree, as part of the United Nations system, how best we can provide our installations in particular to make the elections possible.
Very good. Matthias, please allow us to take a short break and then we will resume. إذا مشاهدينا الأعزاء فاصل قصير ومن ثم نواصل. أهلا بكم من جديد. So Matthias, now if we move to talk about COVID-19, which is the overwhelming topic and issue across the globe. Recently, Gaza has witnessed some sort of a dropping in the percentage of infected cases. What's your impression on that and somehow expectations?
So, first of all, it does indeed seem that we are reaching a phase of more positive developments, as measured in the number of daily infections that get reported. They are clearly down. As measured in the active cases, in mid-December we had close to 10,000 active cases. Now it's less than 5,000. And maybe the most important indicator is occupancy rates in hospitals. So my understanding from Ministry of Health and World Health Organization colleagues is indeed the number of people that are seriously ill and needing treatments is also decreasing. So we are clearly seeing what I think in other parts of the world would be called the end of phase one. Now, the two things I would want to say then is, number one, I really think as UNRWA, because we are so big in Gaza, we should feel proud that we have contributed to getting this crisis under control and preventing it becoming a major disaster. All the measures we took in terms of closing schools, in terms of reducing movement, being very careful, wearing masks, etc., I really think UNRWA can claim with justification of having played a part in getting us to this point where things look a bit better. The second thing, however, to say is this would be the wrong moment to become complacent. So while I agree also with the authorities to relax measures, we cannot go back to normal as it was more than a year ago before COVID. We must continue to be very careful. By that I mean we must continue to adhere to public health measures such as wearing masks in crowded spaces in particular, keeping distances, not having big meetings, and so on. I think by now everyone knows what those measures are. And the reason for that is, like in other parts of the world, often there is a second phase of outbreak, number one. Number two, there are new strands of the virus emerging, and with the border to Egypt at Rafah being open, we don't know if it could enter through there, the new strands. And number three, vaccination. Until really that has taken off, I think we need to be super vigilant, super careful, and be prepared for a second phase of a new outbreak.
Mm-hmm. And you've just mentioned the vaccination, with UNRWA being the largest provider of primary health care, and with support that it provides to over 2/3 of the population across the Gaza Strip. Will there be a role for UNRWA to play in the vaccination process?
Yeah. Yes, for sure we will. We have been in intense discussions and negotiations with the Ministry of Health and with the World Health Organization and others. UNICEF is playing a role, and WFP in terms of the logistics and the purchasing of vaccines. And there's a clear agreement that indeed, because we are so big, as you mentioned, through our 22 health centers, and we have a long experience in vaccination, the basic vaccinations for children, that we will be very much an implementing partner of the vaccination program. So my understanding is that a common platform has been agreed where individuals can register for vaccination, and then they will be directed to different health centers, including ours. So we will play a major role, given our footprint, in the actual administering of the vaccinations at our health centers. And our colleagues in the health team under Dr. Rada's leadership, they are ready. There's been a lot of work that's gone into making sure that at our health centers we have safe spaces to conduct the vaccinations, and of course others have helped, logistics colleagues and so on.
Good to know. And as you've rightly mentioned, the vaccination is voluntary. So what steps are we taking to encourage people to get vaccinated?
Yeah, that's an important and good question. So number one, we very much are trying to promote what the World Health Organization is saying, that has the lead in a technical sense in fighting COVID-19. The World Health Organization is very clear, supported by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, that vaccination is an essential component of getting rid of COVID-19 or getting it under control. So there's no doubt in my mind, together with other UNRWA leaders and the Commissioner General included, that we must be part of vaccination and that we must encourage people, including our own staff, to get vaccinated. I know some people have reservations for some understandable reasons, but I believe that even though we will still need to see exactly what side effects vaccinations may have, trials are still ongoing. I think the clear directive from the World Health Organization is it's safe to do it and it's necessary to do it. Now, speaking more personally as UNRWA director here in Gaza, I've made it known that I would like to be part of the first phase of vaccinations, and I want to, in a quite public way, make sure people know that I am getting vaccinated, because I hope, together with other senior managers of UNRWA, I hope this will send an encouraging signal to our colleagues, our almost 13,000 UNRWA staff, as well as the general refugee population. That they will see, if leaders like myself do it, that they will see that must mean it's the right thing to do and it's safe enough to do it.
Well, I know that you already answered this question, but if you can elaborate further about it, about real steps on the ground that are expected that UNRWA will take in its role to provide the vaccine.
Yeah.
For example, are the plans ready so that we are going to provide the vaccine only to refugees, to non-refugees? Is this clear? What other things can you tell? And also to encourage the population to take the vaccine.
So, I mean, I think the first issue to say or to mention is that the biggest constraint at the moment is actually getting vaccines to Gaza. That is the main challenge at this point. It's not readiness here by us or anyone else. We are ready, I'll come back to that, but it's actually receiving vaccines. And, again, the World Health Organization boss and others have spoken about their concerns on what they call vaccine nationalism, meaning, that certain countries are keeping a bulk of vaccines for themselves and there is not a fair and equitable distribution. And I think we're experiencing this in Gaza. When vaccinations have started in other places, including the West Bank, it hasn't in Gaza yet. So I really want to emphasize at the moment, the critical challenge is not that we are not ready here, it's actually getting the vaccines. Now, to repeat then in terms of readiness here, our 22 health centers, in my understanding, are all ready. We can start tomorrow if we get the vaccines. And we are part of a coordinated mechanism. So individuals, whether refugee or non-refugee, will register on this common platform. And once they've registered, they will be directed. I think they will have a choice, but they will also be directed then to which health centers to go to. And in my understanding, the plan is that we will, at our UNRWA health centers, give vaccines to whoever comes, whoever is directed by this common mechanism. So that means we will not make a difference between refugees and non-refugees in this critical first phase of vaccinations.
Well, that's very encouraging and very good to know. Matthias, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. إذا مشاهدينا الأعزاء، في ختام هذه الحلقة لا يسعني إلا أن أشكركم على حسن المتابعة. إلى أن نلقاكم في حلقة قادمة. هذه ميلينا شاهين تحييكم وإلى اللقاء.